In the next part of the tutorial, we'll learn how to make this rocky path that goes through the forest. So first of all, I'll just delete what I've done and we'll go through the process together. Okay, so it's very similar to the process of putting the pine tree onto the plane. Only this time we're going to create some rocks. So we can do this very easily. First of all, let's just move that 3D cursor over to the side here. And we can do that by holding Shift and right click. And then when we add new objects, it's going to add them over here and keep them out of the way of our model over here. So I'm going to go Add and Mesh. And we've actually got this option here called Rock Generator. So I want you to click on that. And in here, number of rocks, I want you to choose 3 rocks. And just leave all the settings as they are. Then click on the outside of that. And then over here, we can see something has been added to our scene. Click on the Move tool. And you can see that we've got 3 different types of rocks have been created for us. So before we can work with these rocks, we just need to do something that will make Blender run a little bit more smoothly. Otherwise, we might get some issues with Blender crashing. Click on that first rock there, come over to this side panel here and click on this tool, which is called the modifier properties. And up here we see lots of interesting information. What I'm going to ask you to do is to click this little drop down arrow and click apply. And just keep doing that. Like so, and then move on to the next rock and do exactly the same thing. So you need to do that to each of the rocks. Otherwise, Blender is processing lots and lots of information needlessly, and our laptops might crash. So there we go. So that's not too difficult. So we're going to do something called putting the objects into a collection. So you can just click and drag to select all of those rocks together and then hit M on your keyboard. And then it comes up with these options here. And I want you to create a new collection. Now, I've done this previously and I've already got a collection of rocks, which have now been deleted. So I'm going to put these into this collection, but you'll have to click on New, and then you'll call your new collection Rocks. So I'm just going to click on Rocks, and over here we can see we've got our collection where we've got all of our other objects, and now we've got this new collection called Rocks where these 3 rocks have been placed. We're going to now give each of these rocks a slightly different color. So if we go down to the materials, new. Now I've already previously made this, so I've got slightly bluish grey colors. Rock 2 and rock 3. But you will have to create a new material for each of the rocks. And for each rock, I don't want it to be a shiny rock, so once again, I've taken the roughness and increased it all the way to 1, which means it's not going to be reflective. Okay, so now we've got 3 slightly different rocks. What we want to do is to create, as you can see, because my particle system is still active, I'll just actually minus that one. We're going to tell Blender now that we want those rocks to be placed along that middle pathway area there. Okay, so we can do this a few different ways. We can just create a new particle system first and tell Blender to choose the rocks as our objects that are going to be particles, or we can do the weight painting first. So let's do the weight painting first. So we've got the plane selected, change to weight paint. Make sure you're in this option here, object data properties, and you can see I've already got a path there. I'm just going to take that away though. And what you will do is you've already got the information about where the pine trees have been distributed, where the grass has been distributed, and you can see if you click back and forwards, you can see different types of weight painting. So if you click plus one more time, and like was there previously, I'm going to write path. So we want this path to go right through the middle there, and that's where our rocks are going to be distributed. So adjust the radius of your painting tool here to a suitable size. Put weight all the way up to 100, and just start to draw in that path there. If you've got some trees that are in the way, you can just go around them like that. Okay, so now you can imagine that's going to be a rocky path going through the forest. All right, you can go over it and paint it a little bit more neatly if you wanted to, but that's fine for us. Okay, we're going to go back to object mode, click on the particle properties, and we're going to create a new particle system. Now, I've already got one saved in here called path, so I'm just going to call this one path new, just so Blender doesn't get confused. Okay, so we're going to leave it at 1,000. We might even increase that number. But we need to click on How. We need to click Advanced, and that allows us to rotate our objects. Go down, select Rotate. We'll come back and adjust that shortly. Keep scrolling down to Render, and we're going to change this from Path to Collection. Now, when we click on this now, we've got the option here to choose the rocks collection. So select that. Click on object rotation as well. And what we should have seen is, yep, all the rocks have appeared. We now need to tell Blender that we want it to be distributed along where we did our weight painting. So click on path, and all of the rocks magically go along the path there. So if we were to zoom in, we would see the rocks are quite uniform, all looking very similar. So this is where we go up to the rotation options and increase both of these to add a little bit more variety to the way that the rocks have been set out. Don't worry about rocks overlapping each other. What we will do though is just increase the size a little bit and increase this randomness as well. So just play around with that until you get something that looks all right. You don't want them to be too big. That would look a bit silly. Okay, something like that. That's fine. So now we've got our rocky path. It is in kind of straight lines there, which is a little bit off-putting. Normally it would. I think that's just because of the small number of vertices that we've put into the object. You could go back into edit mode and add in more subdivisions here, which would allow you to distribute the rocks a little bit more widely. So let's just get that done in your next step here, Nines, adding the rocky path through the forest. So if you haven't done so for a while, please Control S to save it. And that should become a habit. Just every couple of minutes, just save your progress. It's very frustrating to lose all of that work. So we're going to now add a path, a curved line through the middle of the forest here, and then we're going to attach the camera to that path so that the camera can move through the forest, and then we can animate the camera a little bit to make it appear as though it's a character's point of view as they're maybe walking through the forest. Okay, so let's go and do that. I did have a little play around just after the last section just to try to figure out how to make these rocks appear less like they're in lines. And I did find that when I went down here and opened up this source menu, and I just increased this number here. It says particles per face, and I just messed around with that, and I just thought around about there. Seemed to make the rocks distribute themselves a little bit more randomly. So try that if you're not too happy with the way that the rocks have distributed themselves. Okay, so let's add in now a curved line that will act as our camera's path. Go to a top view like this, and you can just click on that Z up there, which is the easiest way to do that. You can just go back to this plain black and white view, viewport shading. That's fine for just doing this. And what we're going to do is go up here to Add, Curve, and select this path. Okay, now depending on where your cursor was, mine was all the way over there, so it's put the path in where the cursor was, but you can just grab it wherever it was put in. And I want you to move this, it's just a single line at the moment, over to near where the path through the forest begins. Okay, so if you scroll down and have a look at it, it's just a line. We can just rotate it, so at least it starts off generally pointing in the right direction. And kind of get it in the middle. That's going to be fine. You want it to be just around about tree trunk height, I guess. So maybe a little bit taller than that even. Okay, so you don't want the camera to be bouncing along on top of the rocks. Around about, if you can imagine a person walking through here, their head might be around about that high, and that's where we want this line to be to represent that's the character's point of view. All right, so we're going to just go back to that top view with that line selected, and that's called a path. We're going to go into edit mode now, so you can press tab, and now we can see that the path has got these 3 dots in them. So what these dots allow you to do is to add curves to the path, as well as to add new segments. So I'm going to click on this last one here, and then down here is the option to extrude. We've done extruding before, where you take a face of a shape and you can make it come out, or you can even make it go inwards. And that's what we're going to do to this curve, is basically extrude this curve to make it grow. Now, an easy way to do that is in this top-down view, is simply to press E and then just pull your cursor along. Click. So I'm pressing E again. I'm just moving my mouse along and click it. And that's what we'll do. So I'm just going to create a path. You can put a few little extra curves in there. I'm going to keep mine relatively straight because as the camera goes through it, we don't want the camera jittering all over the place. It's better if the camera travels quite smoothly. So I hit E, move my mouse along, click, and just keep moving along. E, click, E, click, E, click. And you can see the line is starting to curve a little bit when we go around those trees. And just keep following all the way to the end here. And click it at the end there. That's good. You can go back to object mode now. Control save. So now what we want to do is to put the camera at the start of that path. Okay, so my camera is all the way over here. I actually like this as the start. So we can get the camera to come over here to the start of the path pretty easily. And this is a really good technique to know how to quickly move different objects around. Let's go back to edit mode. We're going to click on that last vertice and I want you to go to Curve, Snap, Cursor to Selected. Okay, then let's go back to Object Mode. We can select our camera from up this menu here, or wherever your camera is, you can just click on it. And then with the camera selected, we can go Object, Snap, Selection to Cursor. And then our camera has gone to where the cursor was. That's really useful. So I'm just going to start by pointing my camera in the right direction, facing where the curve is. Now, have the camera selected, click on this option for cameras, and what you can do is just make sure the camera is set up properly. So by default, Blender will have the camera set, so I think it's 50 millimeters for the lens. Let's set that to 35, so it's a little bit more of a wide perspective. You can go down here and click depth of field, and this will control how much is actually in focus. So this will make it look a little bit more realistic. Why don't we put that down to 5, and let's decrease the f-stop, and we know about f-stops from using the cameras, so down to 1, which is quite small. It's quite large, actually. Okay, so now what does that look like through the camera? Let's click on the camera icon here. And what you need to do, we did this previously with the box animated characters. If you hit N on your keypad, select View. Down here it says View Lock, and just check this second option here, Camera to View. You can hit N again, and now when we move my mouse, or when you move the touchpad as you normally would move the view, it controls where the camera is at the same time. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get out of camera view. We're going to make the camera stuck to that path there. So with camera selected, we're going to go here to this option called Object Constraint Properties. Click on that. Click Add Object Constraint and choose this option here, Clamp To. All right, now it says, what's your target? What do we want it to clamp to? Click on that, and the only option we have is the path that we've put into the scene. So click Path. Now, which way is the camera facing? It's not really facing the X or the Y direction, but we need to choose one of these. It just makes it a little bit easier to control the camera. So if you select X, for instance, now when I move the X value, the camera is moving along the path like that. Okay. So we can even make sure the camera is right back at the start there. So you should be able to check that when you change that value, your X or your Y, the camera is going to be moving along the path. You can even go into the camera view, and here in the object properties, you can move the camera. Make sure the camera is selected, and that should be working. Not sure why it's not. Go back to camera view. It is the X that we're moving. It's got to move in the negative I'm seeing. So go back to camera view, and when I move that in the negative, it should be moving, but it's not. I don't know why. Okay, but what we can do, let's test it on the timeline. Pull up this box down here. Now yours should already be on the timeline. However, we can change it if it's not. There's this little option here, and timeline. So the camera is at the start of that path, and if you've got camera selected and hit I and location and rotation, and let's move it along how long do we want the camera to go through this forest for? Well, you do a little bit of maths. I'm going to set my frame rate to 30 frames per second. So let's say we want the camera to take 10 seconds going through this forest. So I'm going to increase the timeline to 30, so 300 rather. And if I put the play ahead right at the end, that's 10 seconds. So by the end of the timeline, I want the camera to be at the end. So there we go. I can just see the camera has made it to the end. And I'm going to hit I, location, rotation. So now as you play through that, you can see the camera is moving. You can go into camera view, and it's really going quite fast through that scene. Okay, so maybe it's more like a bird is flying through the scene. Okay, we might even, why don't we slow that down? I'm going to increase the timeline to 600, and I'm just scrolling my mouse wheel back, and I'm going to move that last keyframe all the way to 600, and that should have the effect of making this go at half the speed. Okay, that looks a little bit better. All right, save that progress. Okay, Year 9s, can you attempt to now add in that path for the camera to follow through your forest? In this section of the video, we will learn how to animate the camera so that it really has the appearance as though someone is walking along this path and glancing around as they walk through the forest. Now, before we do that, you might be looking at mine and thinking it looks a little bit different to yours in terms of its brightness, and that's because of what I've done with the light. So there should be a light automatically in your scene, and you can find that up here in the menu. If you click on that, you'll be able to see it in your viewport there. So what you'll need to do is to change that. In this type of scene that we're creating, it makes sense to change the light by going down here to the light options and choosing sun. So it automatically at first adds in a point light, which is useful sometimes, but for this sort of scene, we're going to choose sun and change the value to 4. And to really see the effect of that, if you go up to this option here, this gives you a good idea of what it will look like when you actually export or render your animation that you're creating. And you can see I've rotated my sun, and you can do it using the rotate tool here, or you can go to the object properties and rotate it by changing these values here. And I've just rotated my sun so that there's these nice shadows going across the path. So it's a bit of like an afternoon scene. There's a few other options that you can play around with. The lights as well. You can change the color of the light. If you change the color of the light, it changes the color of your objects as well. So let's just have a little experiment. Let's say this was afternoon and we want it to be sort of a warmish light. You can see that's starting to change the color of the light reflecting off the pine trees there. That actually looks quite nice. I might leave that. See how far we can take it. Nice golden afternoon light. So of course you can create interesting effects. Just have a quick look. Some of these different colors might be suitable for different occasions. That blue one kind of looks almost like moonlight. That might be suitable for a nighttime setting. But I liked that kind of subtle golden light there. Don't overdo it. Kind of like that. Okay, so just make that adjustment. Once again, save any change that you make to your scene. Just take it off that rendered preview view, because it really does use a lot of your computer power, and just go back to this preview. All right. So by now you should have had the camera is on that path and it's moving through the scene. On our timeline, we've got 600 frames, and here where it says output properties, I've selected 30 frames per second. So that means 30 frames, 600 divided by 30 frames will give us 20 seconds. So that's a 20-second scene of the camera going through the forest. So let's choose the first of all, the path. So the nubs path is the curved line that we've put through the scene. And we're going to simply, on our timeline, doesn't really matter where you put this, just hit I on your keypad and location rotation. In fact, I'm going to undo that. Just do it again. I, just location. So we can now add a little bit of movement to that by going up here and changing this section to the graph editor. Okay. Pull down this little arrow here, and we're going to choose the Z location. Go here to modifiers, add modifier, add noise. So what that's done is when you press play, you'll see it, that line is now bouncing up and down. So we need to change the frequency of how much that line is bouncing up and down to make it look a little bit like it's a person walking along. So I'm taking the scale here and increasing the scale. If we put it around about 20 and go to the camera view, and I think we might have cracked it. 20 looks pretty good. Like we said, this is fairly fast. Maybe this person's running through the forest, leaping over the rocks as they go. But it's a little bit more interesting than just having the camera gliding along very smooth. So you can keep fiddling around with that. You can also fiddle with the strength. So if we took that down a little bit, it wouldn't be quite so much movement up and down. It will be a little bit more subtle. And that's fine. Once you find something that works for you, just Control S to save that change and go back to the timeline. Okay, so choose the camera now. We can stay in the camera view, and what we're going to do is add in some keyframes every 100 frames, and that's going to be sort of reference keyframes for us. So just move it along to get to 100, hit I, location and rotation. Go up to about 200, I, location, rotation, 300, 400, 500. All right, and you'll see why we've done that shortly. So now what we can do in between these keyframes is add a little bit of movement to the camera. So we can make the camera turn around this way, and because we've got these keyframes here, the camera will turn around and then move back to looking straight ahead of the path. And then we can make the camera turn the other way, and then it will move back to looking straight ahead of the path. So I'll show you what we mean. Now, in this section, what we're going to do is do some auto keying. So if you click on that option here, whatever change we make is going to automatically put in some keyframes. So you'll see as soon as you go, I'm going to change the camera direction by going to the object properties, and we're changing the Z value. So you'll see if I move the camera that way and let go, is put in some keyframes straight away. You can see the effect of those keyframes. So it turns that way, and then it turns back to looking straight at the path. All right, I'm going to then make the camera maybe go that way, and I'm changing the X value to make the camera look up a little bit. And you can see that, it looks up, and then it looks down. And you can just keep adding in some movements like that. Maybe the character looks down. You might come back and add in something else here that the character's looking at. And this is just adding a little bit more interest to our scene. You decide where you want the camera to be pointing. Maybe there's an interesting arrangement of trees that you can be focusing on. As it gets towards the end of the landscape, there's nothing much to look at. Okay, and I'm going to just leave that last section empty. I'm going to use this option here to go to the end keyframe. I'm not sure that it really has gone to the end keyframe there. The end. Just going to select that, make sure it's actually within the 600 mark. Go to the end keyframe, and I'm going to turn the camera all the way around to be looking back at where we came from. Now, for some reason, it's added in some extra keyframes there. So I'm going to click on the original end keyframes and just delete them. So playing back that last section, the camera turns all the way around to look back at where they came from. All right. So you can play back that entire sequence there, and you can keep fiddling with it. It looks pretty good to me. So Control S to save that. And then we're really nearly ready to export. If you're happy with that, you can keep on adding more and more objects to your scene. Once you get the idea, you could try to make some little flowers, some mushrooms. You could try to create some little type of animal creature. Have a go at modeling whatever comes to your mind. You could try to put in a little lake or something here, just to add a little bit more interest to the scene. But if you're happy with it, just make sure you have saved all those changes, and I'll show you how you can export it now. So this is going to be a bit of a hard task for our laptops. It might take them a little while to actually do this. I want you to first of all go to this section here, and it says Render Properties, and I've already chosen some of these. So just go down and make the same selections that I've selected: ambient occlusion, bloom, screen space reflections, and all of these things will make the final image look a little bit more polished. Click on motion blur. Keep going down here. The last one, if you open up color management like that, and then choose look, medium, high contrast, or you can even choose high contrast. You can really see it does make a big difference. Medium contrast is, medium high is good enough for me. Okay, so then we're going to just save that. Go to View Layer Properties, and I also want you to do just click and select the same things that I've selected. Mist, normal, go click all of these, check that one, and then leave those last ones there. Okay, so then we need to tell Blender where we want our animation to be saved. So I want you to select this one, Output Properties, 30 frames per second. 30 frames is kind of the video standard, but you've also got other options here. 24 frames per second will give it that more traditional film style look. So it's already recognized that the start of our animation is starting on frame 1 and it ends on frame 600. This is where you choose the location to save your animation. So I'm going to put mine in here. That's the folder that I've created to create this tutorial. Just going to say accept. And then this is where you choose your file type. Now, normally what you would do in Blender is to create what's called an image sequence, which saves lots of, you would actually save 600 individual images, and then later on, you put them all together. But just for this exercise, we're going to create a video straight away. So select that option, FFmpeg video, scroll down, encoding, we want to select MPEG 4, and medium quality is fine for you guys. Encoding speed is fine for you guys. Just for me, on my laptop, I'm going to just change these just so I get a slightly better result. Okay, Control S to save all those settings that you've done. And then, before we animate, save the animation, we're just going to hide a few things. So select that pine tree that we created over there, and now we hide it by selecting that and that. I think that should get rid of it. It won't appear in the render. We also do the same thing to these rocks. You really only have to click the camera there just to hide it from the final render. Okay, now hopefully that should work. We go up here to render and we say render animation. Now I realized just about a minute into my rendering of the animation that it wasn't rendering the rocks in the pathway. So what I've done is just unchecked that there. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have turned that off. And that should then allow the rocks to be seen in the final render. By turning these off here, we've just hidden the original rocks from our view in this workspace. So I'm going to render that again using the same steps as before, and then we should see the final result shortly.